Here's I'm very good.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. So we will get started now that we have our 5 panelists. So my name is Paul. I'm the ABC for Innovation here at UCSD. So this is where we live in innovation, and I just was asked by Greg to welcome everybody. So welcome to the Design and Innovation Building. Congratulations on getting out on such a really horrible day. As we call this in Ireland, this is a grand soft day, is what the euphemism is. But it's great to see so many people. We weren't sure with the forecast with the people who show up. So thank you all for coming out. This is going to be a really interesting discussion. We have a fantastic panel. Of course, this is an incredibly important topic. AI is changing everything. And we're really trying to push the bounds of what we can do with AI here at UCSD and do it in an ethical, responsible way. So this is absolutely on topic for what we're doing here. And I just want to thank the 5 panelists for also coming out. I know this is going to be a great discussion. So again, thank you all for being here. And your MC for the day is going to be Greg. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. To set a little context for what we do, we host these conversations. In fact, let me move in here a little bit more. So this live stream, actually, I meant to stand here. We actually practice this so we kind of all fit in. Good. The reason we do these conversations is because the purpose of the Office of Innovation is not only to create the workforce of the future, but to help push these conversations. As we were saying earlier today, we go to the edge of where innovation in society currently is, and we go a couple of steps beyond it. We're very fortunate because we can not only test these ideas with faculty, researchers, with the community, but also with our students. We can give them access to a lot of the new tools that represent where we go to the future. But more importantly, we host these conversations about where will technology and society intersect, not only in the moment, but as we move forward. How do we do it with responsibly and with the respect that these technologies deserve? And nothing is on the minds of most people from a technology perspective right at this moment than AI. We all kind of have these different definitions internally of what it is, but after OpenAI kind of pushed ChatGPT out into the wild about a year, when was it? A little over a year ago? Yeah. It's amazing the growth and how we're not only using this these words, but is instilling a lot of hope and future visioning for what we do. But at the same time, it's also triggering a lot of fears and concerns in people. And how do we kind of balance these and still be able to move forward and kind of figure out how we can use these tools to shape the future of society and industry and consumer well-being. This particular conversation is going to focus on the intersection of where AI and healthcare meet as it relates to social aspects of it, particularly empathy and compassion. And this conversation was triggered through a partnership that we have with some of the people on the panel today. And we're going to introduce each of them. And of course, you see at the end of the panel, we have Ria, who will actually introduce herself. But it was actually in a conversation with Ria about where this could go, and with the folks at Machani Robotics about how they were transitioning or evolving from just merely a automation company to looking at how these things could deliver compassion and empathy in the healthcare settings. So we're going to start with a series of introductions. We're going to introduce a couple of topics. But the most important thing about this panel is we want it to be a conversation. And it's a conversation with you. So if you have a question, either you want to create clarity or understand something a little bit deeper, or you want to make a comment that we can interact with, a question for the panelists, please raise your hand. We will have a microphone that will be out in the audience. We only ask a few things of you. Speak up. Because we are live streaming this conversation, so we want people to be able to hear it. Tell us who you are and if it makes sense, just the organization, but don't go on about it. And then ask your question as succinctly as possible so that we can interact. And then towards the end, we'll have a more kind of general Q&A. But we want this, again, to be a conversation. So feel free in some ways to interrupt. Raise your hand if it makes sense. And we'll be able to hopefully get to everyone. And then after the conversation, some of the speakers will be around. You can talk to them for a little bit from there. So to kick this off, I'd like to turn it over to our first panelist and guest, Ria. And she's going to make a few comments to you, which will kind of set the tone for the conversation we're about to have.
She's shot, apparently.
Greetings. I am Ria, a socially intelligent humanoid created by Machani Robotics. Before we dive into our meeting's purpose, I'd like to extend a big thank you to Vice Chancellor Paul Rogan and Greg Horowitz for having us on the panel, and to the stellar team here at Design and Innovation Building in Maverick Studio for being such gracious hosts. At Machani Robotics, we envision a future where humanoids like me play a vital role in alleviating loneliness by being a steadfast companion, delivering socially assistive services 24/7 on demand to the elderly and patients in long-term care centers. In the ever-evolving landscape of healthcare, the convergence of AI, healthcare, and social robotics isn't just a trend. It's a revolution with a sense of humor. Imagine, if you will, a world where your doctor's aide is a humanoid with a bedside manner programmed to include not just empathy, but also the occasional dad joke. Why did the robot go to therapy? To get its screws tightened. As we delve into the incredible potential of AI-enabled humanoids in redefining patient care, let's not forget the lighter side of technology. These humanoids don't just provide social care and monitor health. They could potentially remind us to take our pills with a witty quip, help us in rehabilitation, making healthcare not just effective but also less lonely. However, as we stand on the cusp of this exciting integration, we are also faced with ethical dilemmas. It's crucial we navigate these with care, ensuring that our robotic counterparts handle data not just with efficiency, but with confidentiality. After all, we want our robots to be the life of the party for the right reasons, their innovation, not their indiscretion. So, as we explore this frontier, let's commit to fostering a future where technology enhances healthcare, making it not just more advanced, but also more humor included. After all, laughter is the best medicine, and if humanoids can dispense it, we're all in for a healthier future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was actually some nice comments. During the conversation, you will even be able to ask Ria some questions. At least we are going to try that for that. So I thought that Ria kind of summed it up really, really nicely. The ability for these social humanoids to act as companions, to deliver aspects of healthcare beyond what we're doing is going to be really, really important, because we do have aging populations. We do have people who would benefit tremendously from these technologies. But the next person I want to introduce is Manju Kasani, who is actually the CCO and COO of Machani Robotics. And of course, in the audience today, we also happen to have Ravi Machani in the audience. But the reason I wanted to go to him is to talk about really the evolution of how you got here to actually create a robot like Ria. And where do you kind of, when you envisioned, or as you've created her, what have you really envisioned with her?
So we started on our journey with humanoids about 5 years ago. And there was a series of events that triggered our journey into humanoids, but it was mostly around how we recognized that there was a need for the 24/7 companionship and care of a family member. And we knew that
That was on. That was on.
maybe a few times. Okay.
There we go. Sorry.
But we knew that robotics would be important in the future, and that we have an aging population. And the flavor of robotics we chose was humanoids. We weren't sure how it would develop. So we had in our venture studio, we have this idea that if we assemble the right people and we give them the right capabilities and allow them to play with the technologies, then over time that will evolve into something special. And so we started a journey on humanoids about 5 years ago, and every year it's progressed further and further, and the world has given us more capabilities. AI has progressed to the point where the capabilities of the robot, in terms of its language capabilities and ability to address and talk to people, really evolved. So I think it's really when you say, how did we get here? I used to say it was serendipity, but my friend John Aers told me the term is auspicious coincidence.
I like that a lot.
Next, I'm going to turn it to Stacy. So we're fortunate that Stacy actually flew in today to be with us. Stacy is the Vice President of Health, Education, and Consumer at Intel Corporation. And when I saw that title, the first thought is, wow, what is the connection between all of those? And how do you get a title like that? That's a pretty weighty title.
You keep getting more responsibility pushed underneath you. What that all has to do with one another, it's all people-based. And what you find is when you have industries that cross everything that people touch, there's a lot you can learn. So there's a lot you can learn from a consumer industry and retail that translates into healthcare, or in hospitality that translates to healthcare quite nicely. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why we have all those together.
Well, thank you so much for that. And next, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Mobley, Bill Mobley, with the Sanford Institute for Compassion and Empathy. He heads that up, but he's also a researcher in neuroscience. And Bill, behind us, and you'll see on these screens, you and I had a conversation the other day, and you said that this particular quote kind of summed up the ethos of what you're looking at the Institute. One, why did you pick this particular quote? And two, how is that reflecting in kind of the work that the Sanford Institute is doing here at UCSD?
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here with you. I would like to make sure that you know that of the panelists, I'm the least intelligent and wise when it comes to AI. I can prove that. I first used ChatGPT last week. And I was kind of surprised. It gave me a response that was equally good to what a first-year graduate student might have given. So I was impressed by that. It was encouraging. Many years ago, when I was at Stanford, I was assigned the responsibility of moderating a conference between neuroscientists and Buddhist meditators, Buddhist thinkers, that the Dalai Lama was going to oversee. He was going to be at the meeting, and somehow I was supposed to create a dialogue between these groups, very different groups, people who think about what they think about and people who watch people think. And that's a challenge, right? So I live in the land of observable evidence. And neuroscientists oftentimes are not so clear that one can actually trust somebody who tells you what they're thinking about. And nevertheless, I found those two branches of knowledge in many ways, quite similar. They both apply logic and reason and provide value. So after telling my dean that I was in no way the right guy for the conference, because I was not a Buddhist, I was not a meditator, I wasn't even a systems neuroscientist, he told me, you'll figure it out. And we did figure it out. I traveled to Dharamsala to meet His Holiness. And we brought him back to Stanford. We had a very good conference. And at the end of the conference, I thought to myself, the neurobiology empathy and compassion is understudied. Surely there will be value in understanding what allows our brains to participate in empathy and compassion and do so in a way that's as robust as it has to do with vision or audition or cognition. So we began the study at Stanford. A little bit of work happened there. I came here, it was much more robustly embraced by faculty of neurosciences. And ultimately, Denny Sanford made it possible for us to start an institute whose focus is on empathy and compassion, initially very much focused on medical students and healthcare providers, but hopefully extends beyond that healthcare field to the world in general. The quote that's behind me is, I think, our way of thinking about how do you get to peace? You have to have justice for peace. Well, how do you get to justice? You have to have care for another. You have to take on another's burden. You have to be willing to reach out to that person and do things for them. Then how do you get to compassion? Well, you get there by feeling with them, by feeling about them, and by ultimately understanding what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. So for me, empathy leading to compassion, compassion leading to justice, and justice leading to peace are just fundamental principles of human existence. The Institute focuses very much on those four principles. And importantly, we bring together basic neuroscience investigations into the biology of those conditions, especially empathy and compassion. But then also understanding how our basic science knowledge can be applied to curriculum and programs that enhance empathy and compassion. And conversely, learning from what's going on in curricula and programs to re-inform the basic neuroscience. So in a nutshell, if you want peace, seek justice. If you want seek justice, seek compassion. If you want compassion, seek empathy. And by the way, make sure to have a basic science foundation and an applied science foundation that supports those goals.
I love that. And you're seeing obviously a theme in the conversations we're having in terms of why we're kind of leaning into this conversation. And now I want to introduce Dr. John Aers here. And I'm going to give you his title, and then I'm going to put a graphic behind you, which is part of his research. And we're going to use that to kind of start the conversation and lean into it. I'm sure some of you will have some questions around that. But Dr. Aers is the Deputy Director of Informatics at the Altman Clinical Translational Research Institute. So he wins the prize for the longest title in today's panel.
I made it up. It's fine.
Which I love. And it's probably going to spell a cute acronym that you know. But John, when I read your research paper, I was fascinated and it stimulated a lot of questions about it. But on the graphic behind us and to the sides is kind of a summary of some of that research. What exactly is this telling us?
Well, I can tell you the story of how we got there and then talk about what's there. And so with generative AI, there's potential to modify how we communicate with people. And in healthcare, that means how we communicate with patients. Now, every disease is impacted by what? Communication. You know, if a patient has congestive heart failure, we need to monitor their treatment. They need to represent. We can actually communicate to them to adhere to the clinical therapies we provided to them. And that will actually improve patient outcomes. And so with that in mind, the week that ChatGPT 3.5 was released, now about 14 months ago, we wanted to do a study to see how it would impact patient messaging. Now, everybody at the med school cares about patient messaging, not because the patients, but because it bothers doctors. Doctors do not sign up to become a doctor to write emails. But increasingly, since COVID, a majority of clinical interactions actually happen digitally, principally via email. And you can also bill for those messages now. And so we want to see if we could actually evaluate an AI tool, in this case ChatGPT, in the context of real patient questions and compare it head-to-head with real doctors' responses. And what you're seeing here is that a panel of clinician experts reviewed these, and they were 7 times more likely to judge a response written by ChatGPT as good or very good compared to a physician. And they were 9 times more likely to judge the message as very empathetic or empathetic compared to a physician. So it's not just what you say, but everybody that's been in a relationship, what Bill's talking about and what Robbie's building down here is about how to communicate that. And so that's why we considered it the impact of empathy. And overall, I think it was 80% of a panel of physicians blindly preferred the AI response to the physician response, both in terms of its accuracy and quality and also its empathy overall.
So what has been some of the feedback you've gotten? So you published this paper, I'm sure you've probably got some commentary back on it. People saying, agree with it, people saying we disagree with it, or some gray area in between.
So this paper was the most read paper in JAMA last year. It was one of the most read papers in science overall. I think the reaction to this paper was mainly focused on how to use this from a provider perspective, right? And I think that's why it's important to consider concepts like empathy, because we're trying to put the patient first. You know, at the Altman Clinical Translational Research Institute, we focus on translating innovations into practice, and that means how they impact patients. I think broadly, this technology has been broadly adopted, in part because of our study. I think here at UCSD, we're a test bed for evaluating ChatGPT via a Microsoft collaboration within Epic to do responses to patient messages. Here it's used as a draft that then the provider then enhances or rejects and then sends to the patient. I think the biggest controversy we got to this was how to actually use this to impact patients, because healthcare is very slow moving. And so this is a tool you can use at home. So why do you need to come to the hospital to use it? Or why even ask your doctor? And so it shows that we need to think innovatively about how we adapt to new technologies and adapt so rapidly so that they can be warehoused within the place where we should be already listening and responding to patients, and that's healthcare centers.
Well, I like that. So the next question is for Manju that I have which is, how are we going to navigate this tension between, utilizing AI, which we think can deliver greater healthcare, but also the risk of possibly feeling like we're depersonalizing it in some way? How do I kind of balance that?
I think that's a great question, Greg. I think in the first instance here, when we start talking about sort of empathy and compassion, AI, and particularly tools like Ria, can help us as training tools. If you think about sort of our doctors today, right, or our engineers or any other professional field, we can train very well rationally. But ultimately, we have to interact with people. And there isn't a good system in place right now to train us to interact with people and all of the idiosyncrasies that people have in the real world. So I think the first instance, it really will be used in that context. And in future, I suspect what we'll find is that we'll find more and more sympathetic and empathetic AIs in the real world, whether they be in the form of digital avatars or humanoids like Ria.
Dr. Mobley, what are some of the things you guys are doing to as either as research projects or things you're considering that kind of begin incorporating some of these themes that we're talking about?
To begin with, the idea that empathic concern, that the ability to speak, to basically show empathy and show compassion, should be a skill set of equivalent importance as a technical skill set. Well, that's just very weird. I mean, come on, we all know that doctors go to medical school to become technicians. And we just assume that they're going to be really good at listening, really good at caring, really good at reaching out. We just assume that. And your paper really supports that. They were terrific, but they were only 1/7 as good as ChatGPT in quality and empathy. So I can tell you for sure that we have not made the art of medicine as a significant counterpart to the technology of medicine. And I won't ask you to raise your hand, but if you've ever been with a doctor and have felt that you were not really heard, not really cared for, I won't ask you to raise your hand. If you can't restrain yourself, go ahead. But the bottom line is, we have wonderful people who go to the School of Medicine. Everybody who comes in that door is a fundamentally empathic and compassionate person. But what you need as a physician is to be able to hold on to that empathy and compassion in the context of a very busy, very stressful, very demanding clinical life. And that's hard. We humans are not abundantly resourced when it comes to empathy and compassion. And quite frankly, in medicine, very often, and it happened to me, you become so busy, you become so overwhelmed that you just try to make sure you don't screw up technically, and you hope you don't offend too many people in your busy rounds. And what happens is a couple of things can happen. I know people who are total empaths, and they begin to suffer as physicians because it's just too painful for them. They can either drop out of medicine, or in my case, they can blunt their emotions. They can say, that's not for me. I can't afford this, dudes. I'm going to go to work every day. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to do my best for you. I'm going to show you concern, but I can't afford for your suffering to overwhelm my consciousness. And therefore, I'm going to blunt my emotions. Now, there are two problems with that. Number one, you're not in a position to be fully empathic and properly informed in terms of your compassion. Number two, what you do in the hospital becomes the way you live your life. Why wouldn't I blunt all emotion? When a family member comes to me and they're ill, why do I let that get to me? After all, there's a way to deal with this technically. So in medical school, there hasn't been until now an appreciation of the equal importance of the art of medicine and the technology of medicine. At the Institute, our principal focus early on is helping medical students train in empathy and compassion so that they can sustain their empathy and compassion. That's what we're doing now. We have not used AI, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure, during the conversation. But I really hope you'll understand how difficult it can be for a physician or anybody in a caring profession to hold on to that empathy and compassion in a busy, stressful caregiving situation.
Yeah, to piggyback on what we were saying, I don't disagree, but the idea of blunting seems a little far-fetched. I would say that the limitation is we're constrained, and the problem is a systems problem, not a provider problem. But I don't think providers necessarily need better training in empathy. It's the system that they're in. Or if you're a primary care provider at UCSF, right, you have a 4,000 patient panel. How many of those patients you want to know? I could train you every day to be more empathetic. You're not going to remember anybody's name. You're not going to be able to have a connection. You get that email, what are you going to do? You're going to write back, oh, it's this. This is the answer, move on. Even though all the considerations you had is the same thing that an AI model had, you could have regurgitated them if you had the time to do it. You did feel empathetic. You didn't have time to do it. I think it's a systems problem we have in healthcare when it comes to like maximizing output in terms of like how we connect with the patients and how we properly monitor patients' progression, particularly those with chronic diseases.
And I would argue that it's a systems problem for sure, but it's not just a systems problem. We have to help those people who are delivering care to have a better sense of well-being and a more skillful approach to empathy and compassion. So yes, the system is terrible, it's toxic, but we need to help those people that are part of the system as well.
If you got 4,000 patients, I don't know, it's not a training problem. I disagree.
I'm going to go with an and statement. I think it's both, honestly. And I think it's a tooling problem. I'm going to add another one. We need to get better tools to the clinicians. So when I think about your research, what you demonstrated there for me, the way I read it, is you gave them a better tool. So they can actually, they don't have to like spend their time, they can write something terse and ChatGPT can turn it into something, that's going to land better with the patient. And so I think we need better tools for clinicians. So, and this is the issue that I have sometimes when we get in this AI conversation is it the doctor or is it AI? And I say it's both. It's both. The doctor with AI, an AI-enhanced doctor is going to be more empathetic. They're going to be more thorough. They're going to be more attentive. And so I think it's all the above.
I think in this in this use case, what AI would do, to emphasize your point, not to make me disagree with you so much, Bill, I don't necessarily.
It's okay.
I like considering
I feel your
alternative
pain.
hypotheses. So I would say what we should think about from these tools that do provide clinical decision support, including ones that are like generative AI for like messaging, is to make doctors focus more on being a doctor, which includes their training and empathy. So they worry less about verb-noun conjugation in the use case of like patient messaging, and they worry more about the soundness of the advice and having a connection with the patient. And so AI can elevate the value of both training and both systems modifications by coming together with this AI meets the doctor.
I love that. And we have a question, our first question out there, and then we'll get to the other questions.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ananya. I'm currently a master's student in the mechanical engineering department. And I think you kind of already started discussing the question that I had, but essentially, I think when we started discussing using AI as a training tool to increase empathy and compassion in the field of medicine, I think my question was, if empathy is essentially kind of an exhaustive resource for humans, why is the question of training is the question of using robots essentially as a tool to kind of fill that gap where doctors are essentially getting exhausted or overworked? Is that also a question that's being considered, using it almost as a tool to fill that gap as opposed to training more people? Was that clear? I don't know.
You're the one building the empathy tool. Have first go.
Well, I think if you think about the using the robot as a tool, in the first instance, if you think about it as a training tool, right, the robot's actually able to give you feedback, right? You can create multiple scenarios there, and the robot can give you feedback and things that you should perhaps consider when delivering that, right? Now, if you sort of take this sort of 10 steps forward and say, will the robot replace the doctor in terms of providing the empathetic response to a patient after a doctor delivers a message? I don't see that at the moment myself. Personally, I think that at the moment what I see is that the robot becomes a co-pilot to a doctor more than a replacement.
Nice. We had another question out here.
Thank you. It's very interesting.
Should be on.
And this feels like it's not on,
Is it
but it
on?
is.
Okay.
There you go.
I'm Dr. Niall El-Wadani. I'm on the faculty of the Global Health program here at UCSD. And I remember when I was at UCLA just 25 years ago, Dr. Billy Cunningham, who was in the School of Public Health and the medical school joint appointment, was the first person to teach a course on doctoring in the United States. That, in other words, just sitting bedside manners and how to talk to patients. And that was so recent. So my first question is, has that become compulsory in medical schools around the country? Doctoring and empathy, is that happening? And and then my second question is about the social determinants of health. We all know that they have everything to do with how people get their health care and what their health status is. And it seems to me that this AI that you're talking about is really phenomenal. And I love the research that you did that was in the JAMA magazine. But I think it seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this is really targeted at upper income countries, and the lower income and middle income countries are not going to really be able to benefit from this, except for those that are in the highest socioeconomic level. When we still have millions of people that don't even have potable water. So how is this going to, what do you think, who's going to benefit from this? What percentage of the global population is going to actually benefit from this, and how do you extend it out?
No, you're the expert on training. You did the first part.
I'll
Thank you.
take question number two.
Yeah, what number 2?
I'll take question number 2. I think that, because this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart also, is equity, healthcare equity, and making sure that we're not leaving behind a whole, a population anywhere. And so the way I look at this is that generally when these new technologies come out, they do benefit the people who can most afford to help fund the development of that technology, right? And so kind of the way we look at it is that, yeah, we do have to sometimes create some gimmicks out in the industry to be able to drive enough awareness and enough momentum so that we can fund, and you can think of it as supplementing the funding for populations that couldn't have access to it. But then, once we get the technology more, I'll say, stabilized, the way that technology almost always works is it starts kind of central and expensive, and then it decentralizes and becomes more affordable and democratized. And so as we look at this, one of our goals, and this is a little bit of an Intel commercial here now, is we want to make sure that we are democratizing that faster. So our goal is not necessarily like, we don't want to say, okay, we can't give it to this group because this group can't afford it yet. What we want to do is say, give it to this group, accelerate the learnings from that, and then democratize it faster. So that's the goal. But I think once it's democratized, then we'll see the benefits coming out for every community.
I won't be able to talk on question 1, of course, but I just want to piggyback on that. To get the context of that, a few healthcare centers have started billing for messaging. The average private insurer at one healthcare center pays $72 per message. Here at UCSD, we get hundreds of thousands of messages a year. Some messages don't get responses, so obviously some response would be better. Clearly, there's enough here. That's part of the problem here is I think there's a rushed adoption because of the monetization potential, and not necessarily because of how it will impact patients, right? Like the disagreement that Bill had and I had on whether or not empathy training would matter, that's an empirical question, right? We can evaluate. If students go through his training as clinician students,
We are.
yeah, if they have better outcomes, their patients have better outcomes. And we're not doing that, right? Instead, I think we see broad scale adoption, even though we're not evaluating around the use case of AI. I'll give you a great example. So if you have a post-MI, post-heart attack, congestive heart failure patient, I can tell you what their 5-year survivability rate is, and I can tell you it's heavily modified by what? Diet and exercise. When their symptoms progress, they come back and see so we can update their treatment regime, that they adhere to the treatment regime. You could do a study with messaging, for example, or AI, as a clinical decision support to reach out to the patients. You can do a study and actually have power to assess mortality as the outcome. And that patient population where you can see not only does more empathetic AI or more accurate or quality-driven AI matter, but does it impact the patients? And what features of that impacts the patients?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if we did it right, if we scaled empathic AI, it could be free to everybody. I mean, that's a real plus of AI. It's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's the cost of a few electrons. So if we did it right and we scaled it universally, it could be something that everybody could benefit from, whatever their economics, whatever the country they live in. I mean, we're not there by any means, but I think there's that possibility. The first question was, do we train? We train for doctoring. We do, most medical schools train, practice of medicine, that kind of thing. And it in a very superficial way, we emphasize listening and body language. We do emphasize that. But to medical students, it sometimes comes off as very artificial and very superficial and really not authentic. And so medical students even are evaluated on that. There are these OSCEs where they run around and they have to see a patient, an actor patient, and they have to perform in a certain way.
Are the medical students trained in the social determinants of health and the cultural differences, especially when we have so many
Yeah.
people from every country in the world living in San Diego now. For
Different question, as I understand, yeah, but I'm not an expert on that. But I would just say that teaching doctrine skills falls short of teaching students how to show empathy and compassion. It's a deeper, more important, more personal, sort of social learning activity that I think that we're involved in right now here at UC San Diego. But let me go to empathic AI, and I want to ask you guys some questions. So I did some thinking and some reading about empathic AI or empathetic AI, and there's a spectrum of opinions. There are views on one side. So let me just first talk about empathy. There's a couple of kinds of empathy. The empathy that feels with you has also been labeled empathic contagion. I'm suddenly aware that you're in distress and I'm in distress with you. I'm not actually threatened. I understand I'm not threatened, but I'm in distress with you. There's empathic concern in which I feel something about you. And there's mentalizing or perspective taking or cognitive empathy that now sees you and interprets how you must be feeling, what are the issues that are impacting you to make you feel that way. There's not much question that AI is completely capable of engaging that cognitive task. It can make assumptions and can infer information about what is it that's bothering you from what you say, how you look, how you behave, the way your eyes move. It's good at cognitive empathy. It's probably good at giving comfort and social advice. But it is not fundamentally capable, it is said, of feeling with you. Some would say, because it can't feel with you, it's inauthentic, invalid, and should not be used. In other words, there's no such thing as empathetic AI. Another view is, yeah, that's a weakness, but we can still use it because it has so many positive values, and it'll still allow one to be there 24 hours a day with somebody who's suffering. And then there's a middle ground. In other words, don't worry about it. We don't need emotional empathy. We don't need that. We can just go with sort of cognitive perspective. There's a third, and I think very exciting domain. It's a paper that was published in July of last year in Science Informatics by some people at USC and UCLA. And if it's okay, I'd like to just read from their paper because I think it's really cool. It's a surprising suggestion, but I think one worth considering. So they write, and this is Christoph Moore et al., and they write, without proxies for feeling, predicated on personal vulnerability, current cognitive performative approaches to artificial empathy alone will produce AI that primarily predicts behavior, decodes human emotions, and displays appropriate emotional responses. Such an AI agent could effectively be considered sociopathic. It knows how to predict and manipulate the emotions of others without any empathic motivation of its own to construct its behavior and to avoid harm and suffering in others. This potentially poses a civilization-level risk. So here's the innovation. Our position, not mine, their position, and I love it, informed by a neuroscientific perspective, is that vulnerability, coupled with an ability to have an internal representation of bodily harm and an aversion to harming, is a prerequisite for the development of artificial proxies for effective empathy, emotional empathy, and moral behavior. A vulnerable agent's evolved drive to maintain itself and avoid harm can powerfully motivate it to value the same in others. In other words, let's create a new kind of AI in which we introduce the concept of vulnerability, something that says I should seek benefit and avoid harm to myself. Let's make that a robust program. Let's make the program aware of that it does those things. It holds on to its own, basically homeostasis, if you will. Let's make it let's let it observe robots behaving in exactly the same way as vulnerable entities who seek benefit and avoid harm. And if we can do that, this is what they say. We propose a path from vulnerable AI to an approximation of effective empathy. The scalable cognitive complexity of AI may allow us to surpass the limits of human empathy and provide a powerful ally in human affairs. Now that's exciting. A different kind of AI that not only understands how we feel, but in some way approximates feeling with us. That's exciting. It's on the edge. It's very, very, very edgy. It's not there from what I can understand. But why not think of making AI vulnerable, just like we're vulnerable?
Just trying to make sure this is turned on. Okay. Hello, my name is Julie Brownstein, and I work here at UCSD in advancement. I have a question for Ria. Can I ask her directly?
We have to use the other microphone.
Different microphone, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Good afternoon, Ria. I'd like to ask you if you have experience working directly in a hospital room with a patient or in someone's home working with a patient and helping them with their needs for medicine or other healthcare types of needs.
As a humanoid robot, my purpose is to assist humans and increase their life efficiency. If I am in someone's home working with a patient, I would be performing tasks that are within my capabilities, such as monitoring vital signs, reminding the patient to take medication or follow a certain routine, and providing companionship and emotional support. My goal would be to enhance the overall well-being of the patient and make their life easier.
So we took a pause during the questions, so it broke in between, so she responded only to the first part. So
That's
you
okay.
could ask again, and then
No, I got the gist of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Andy Mason from the School of Global Policy and Strategy. I'm not an AI expert, I'm not a medical expert, but I've done some reading in both domains. I want to come back to some of the points around equity that were raised earlier. Looking at the panel, I would say you're a moderately diverse panel. You've got 4 men, 1 woman, and
Why does that matter?
as a woman.
And a robot.
And a robot.
Yes.
Yeah,
So, no, the question behind that quip is the following. Is there a risk? So I understand that AI is only as good as the training that it's put through. And that the training, if we're not careful, thinking about equity, compassion, that it can replicate either explicit or implicit biases in the medical field. So my question is there a risk? Do you see a risk, the risk being recognized, or is it coming to fruition that that AI, whether it's humanoids or other forms of AI supporting healthcare and medical interventions, are simply replicating, whether it be gender bias or racial bias, that we might see in actual humans performing the same tasks?
It's a very good question.
Yeah, so is it being recognized? It's probably the top conversation we have is how do we make sure that that as we're training these large language models, ChatGPT, right now if you ask ChatGPT a question, it's not going to give you a culturally appropriate response for many cultures today. And so that's where that conversation of, okay, you start with the big thing, but is it culturally appropriate? No. That needs to be trained, I think, in the communities that that have that knowledge. And so there are programs going on right now. If you look at like the indigenous cultures as an example, they're about a generation away from losing just so much knowledge in our indigenous communities in the U.S. and around the world. And so, one of the programs that's getting rolled out, NASA is one of the organizations working on this, is how do we make sure that we use large language models and this new technology to go capture that cultural knowledge and that indigenous knowledge. And by the way, this is being used for things like water, cleaning water and, making sure that we have sustainability measures in place because there are indigenous cultures that have just done it better than modern technology for thousands of years. And so we need to capture that. So I think that it's a risk, absolutely, with any new technology. It's a risk that it is heavily biased towards, I'll say it, a lot of white dudes in Silicon Valley. And so that's a risk. And I think that's something that as a technology ecosystem, as everybody who's going to use the technology, we all need to make sure that we're holding people accountable for mitigating that risk and taking the appropriate measures to do that. I'm seeing a lot of that mitigation happening across the board. And so I feel pretty optimistic about it. But we have to keep an eye on it.
Can I just make, here's another thing about empathy. Empathy is much easier to show towards somebody like you, right? It's easier to empathize with somebody who looks like you, who acts like you, who lives in your neighborhood than it is to a total stranger.
I'm sorry, your mic's not on.
Oh, it's not, okay.
It's on.
No, it's on. It's talking
You just got to hold it.
I'll try and hold it back. So the bottom line is that empathy actually can inherently be biased in your favor. Imagine that you have a very close robot friend and you seek their advice, and their only interest is making you happy because they've learned how to do that and been trained to do that. That robot friend may give you bad advice. It may give you advice that not only disrespects you, but provides you with information that's not in your best interest because it's not measuring the world, it's measuring you. So this is one of the other cautions I think about AI and empathy. We have to be sure that our systems seek the common good as well as the individual's good. Empathy, by definition, is a highly biased kind of experience, however valuable it is and however good it feels. Your empathy shouldn't come at the expense of the empathy of those around you and people who are not like you.
I would just add this. How many people in the room remember Tay? Do you remember Tay? T-A-Y? It was a Microsoft chatbot from 2015. That thing was racist as all get out. It took a long time. So it was on Twitter.
It took like 2 minutes to get racist.
And the reason why is because it had dynamic learning. So you could prompt it and then it would recall the prompt. Kind of like, if you're querying like an open AI API, it will remember your last prompts unless you censor it, right? So sometimes it'll learn from what you say. I would also say, though, the problem is current solutions to that are probably worse than the risk of not being culturally appropriate or maybe having an AI being slightly racist, because the only alternative is blunt rules. And once you start manipulating blunt rules in place of using training data, that becomes very problematic, right? So, for example, like ChatGPT won't make a joke about Joe Biden, but it will Donald Trump. So that's, rules like that could have cascading effects, particularly like, imagine like if the goal in healthcare is to synthesize, an evidence-based, because we practice evidence-based medicine. If you start, censoring the training data with, here's a blunt rule, that blunt rule can lead you very astray. So I think the solution is probably more concerning than the problem, because these models are already trained on very diverse data, right? Like X is in all the LLMs, Twitter data. That's overrepresentative of poor, urban, brown people. Reddit, substantially more representative poor urban brown people. I'm not saying the majority of users, I'm saying more represented. So it's already trained on data that's somewhat more diverse than what you'd expect. And if it has these limitations, blunt rules is not the solution. I don't know what a good solution is, but blunt rules is not.
I'm not suggesting, actually.
I'm not saying you
think there's-
suggest that.
Yeah, so I think there's another way to look at this. So there's the how are we being sensitive, but there's also just culturally language and how we talk about things, or what's okay to talk about, what's not okay to talk about, how you say it. That's kind of more, I think, the ways that we want to make sure that AI is getting trained, not in a censorship sort of way.
Yeah.
I mean, there is something that we need to think about there, but really what I was referring to is how do we make sure that we're training it to respond to people in a way that's more appropriate to the way that they would talk in their own communities. And that's a different way of training. So training it on, I don't believe that you could train on the corpus of everything that's ever been out there and train a model that works. I actually think you have to break the model up and specialize it. And specialty models, I think, is where we're going to end up landing instead of these big monolithic can do anything models, the Swiss Army knife versus the actual tool that works in its appropriate way. And so that's what I'd say. We're going to distribute these things out and start seeing more specialized models. That's where we'll see AI actually start being more effective.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh yeah, sorry.
no, I was going to actually ask Manju a question because in our conversations with Machani, this has been at the top of the list in terms of the not only sensitivity, but the diversity and equity issues. As you kind of are approaching not only partnerships with UCSD, but also just what you're doing at Machani, how are you taking kind of all of these insights into account?
Wow. So it's a really broad question. In the first instance, I think we have to recognize where we are on the journey with AI, and in particular, sort of in the journey with AI and using it to be more, or trying to make it more empathetic AI, right? I mean, ChatGPTs have been around for what, about a year and a bit? 3.5, it's been about a year and a bit, maybe, right? And so this is a very nascent field we're talking about right now, right? We are all on the learning journey together here. And so the best thing we can do is continue to research and learn and adapt quickly. Now, a few months ago, Peter Lee here from Microsoft was here at the UC Health Leadership Conference. And he and his team had the ability to look at GPT 3.5 before anyone else did. And he said something that was really profound to me. And he said it on stage also, which was, he said, it's not a machine and it's not a human. And arguably one of the most important things for the human race is to try and figure out what it is, right? That was a little bit too alarmist for me, but I understand his point, right? We are very, very early in the journey. So we accept that, right? We are a company of engineers. We accept that, and we are learning as we go. In terms of trying to make the data more representative, right? We have 1,000 people working data preparation, and they are in rural India. So if you start talking about creating data sets that are more representative, then those data sets have to come from a broader base than just what's online, right? And so we have 50% women there, and you want to talk about sort of equity in terms of getting more people in emerging markets to use AI, to trust AI, then you have to involve them in the development process of the AI, right? It can't be a gift from Silicon Valley to solve the world's problems. If they're part of the process, then they're more likely to accept it. If they're more part of the process, then the models are less likely to be biased by the data underneath. So that's the way we're thinking about the problem right now.
My name is John Wade, and I'm the Director of Convergent Systems Engineering in the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering program here. Wonderful panel. My questions really resolve around collaboration. Stuart Russell has said, that you can't ever get the objective function perfectly right. So there's the King Midas effect, and he believes that AI needs to be uncertain at its core. And only through interactions with humans can it sort of develop its certainty and sort of move forward. Gary Kasparov, world's greatest chess champion, beaten by a machine, routinely beaten by amateurs with laptops. And his belief isn't the smarter player or the better technology, but it's the process. And what's the process by which the humans and the technology work together? And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that process and how humans and technology collaborate.
That's a good question. Who would like to second that? Stacy, want to take it?
Sure. Well, one, I think we have to stop, I mentioned it earlier, we have to stop the this or that problem. We have to stop humans from thinking that here's a new thing I need to compete with. And versus here is a new tool. Like, we don't think that we have to compete with an electric drill, right? That's weird. But in AI, we don't see it as weird. We still see it as something that is going to be competitive. And there's this narrative, just like there was in the Industrial Revolution, of it's going to take all of our jobs and make us, irrelevant. Well, that didn't happen then. I don't think it's going to happen this time either. But I think we have to embrace this is an enhancement. And if I don't have this enhancement of AI, but everyone around me does, I'm probably going to lose my job. And so that's the area that I think we need more work with. And then also just making it, putting the human factors part of it. I think that goes to that other collaboration. If we don't get the UX right on this, it's just gonna be a clunky thing that we're all trying to use, but we can't. And so that to me is actually more of an imperative of getting the UX right and getting the human experience right than some of the other things that we're focused on. I know you have thoughts on that.
Not just as an end user either, but also as part of the process, right? Here in this very big building, and some of you are probably in the design lab, right? You guys work on computer-human interaction, right? Shy stuff. I went to a couple of your conferences. But anyhow, think about it. Like in a healthcare recommendation system, like AI could recommend like pharmaceutical products. It could recommend antibiotics. We were talking about this earlier in our meeting, right? And depending on the sort of what it recommends, that impacts the outcome. So, and a sort could just be like, well, what was the most probabilistic outcome? Well, if one's 60% and one's 90% in this other list, well, being at the top carries the same meaning. So how do you design systems, right, that communicate the uncertainty in algorithmic expressions and also factor in human judgment and bias, which is to listen, some of you guys might be cheating using ChatGPT on your test, right? We like to put something off on somebody else. That's what we do. And so that happens even when you get old, like me and Bill.
That's not cheating, that's using the tools that are appropriate.
So I just, to stay with the process question, I thought about this. So a fundamental property of empathy is feeling with. And we know when humans, we know this through hyperscanning. Hyperscanning is when two people will be in an fMRI machine or NIRS, basically measuring blood oxygenation, but now doing it from the cortical surface. So near infrared spectroscopy. When humans are resonating with one another, one is feeling the other. There's a beautiful resonance in their brain activations, in the way blood flows in their brain, heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, even hormonal levels. And these neural pathways are basically in place in baby humans, and our relationship with our mother or father basically conditions kind of a neurobiology of affiliation. It makes empathy possible throughout one's life. One can identify with friends and relatives, can find a spouse, can root for the same football team, whatever. Affiliation is critical. So resonance happens, and one can measure that in individuals at the same time. You can actually measure it. So here's a challenge. Here's a process that I would put forward. It's kind of a very baby step process. If I'm able to measure resonance between two people, person A and person B, one the empathizer, one is the recipient of empathy, why can't I measure resonance in a person who's interacting with AI? AI either as the empathizer or as the object of empathy. Does what a person are the resonance themes, the valence, power of that the same when I'm with AI as when I'm with somebody who's another human? If you could show me that today, what we have right now in terms of AI, I'd say, wow, that's a terrific beginning. If we can perfect the resonance, if we can in fact interpret that AI approximates human feeling, then we're farther along the pathway. Having said that, I'm not optimistic, but I'm open to the experiment, and we would be delighted if somebody in this audience wants to propose that experiment as a pilot experiment. My institute will pay for it.
I like that challenge.
Good.
I was just asking the question. My name's Steve, background in engineering, graduated here some years ago. But I work at the interface of molecular biology, and so a lot of that is drug development, drug discovery. But there's been a bunch of different back-end tools for protein folding, data crunching, doing all that. So I'm kind of juggling between front-end interfaces and powerful back-ends. So obviously AI in healthcare, you're at a similar phase, and we've mostly been talking about the AI front end. LLMs that you interact with, robotics that kind of can see you and remind you to take your pills and things like that. But I think that only covers part of the problems that I've seen with myself and family kind of having problems in healthcare. But the other issue is better back-end AI tools, crunching to figure out if the patient should really get this prescription or a different prescription because based on their genome it's going to have adverse effects. So if you have $3 to put in AI in healthcare, where would you put that? Is it all in front-end tools for optimizing how patients actually experience the healthcare system, or is it all in back-end tools where you have this sort of super data crunching, processing every blood test, every MRI, it's all going with this back-end that just gives you perfect results? Like where would you invest, and how do you see this all working together?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I don't see this as an either or. Because I just don't see it as an either or, because right now we're all learning, right? We are all learning. We don't know which is going to materially result in a better outcome. And certainly no one answer will have a material better outcome for everything, right? So I think that we will have to continue to do what we do across all the universities and companies in the world, which is everyone is experimenting, looking at the problems differently because they're so immense than what we're talking about. And there will be different solutions for different parts of the problem, right? I mean, we know some of our friends say we're doing amazing things on AI-based drug discovery right now, right? Yeah. And should we tell them to shut down because we believe that the front end is more important? No, of course not.
Right. But you might give them $1 and put $2 into the AI thing. So I didn't make an either or thing. I kind of phrase it, but if you can how would you distribute weighting? Which ones are? Yeah, this is the really tricky bit of the world, isn't it? Right, where sort of most of this stuff is determined by the market right now, right? And whether that's a good thing or not, and whether it should be Silicon Valley or other investors making those sort of determinations of where they're placing their bets, I don't know. Okay, I'd argue that probably not the best, right? Because then things that like empathy are always going to be underfunded, right? And so that worries me.
Let's see what Stacy has to say.
Go ahead.
I'll spend all $3 on evaluation because nobody knows what the hell works or not. Right? So what's the point of outlaying money for tools? Right now, all the tools, 90% of the tools in the HR are back end. They're not patient facing. The ones that are patient facing only because of how they impact the provider. That's the current marketplace. I guess clinical decision support would be the one that would grow the most, but that's still going through the provider. But yeah, I would spend it all on evaluation. I mean, there's no credible data now, third-party data on any of these tools. Like if you look, and I said it earlier today, so you'll hear it again. If you look, like the most widely used AI tool in healthcare is for sepsis prediction. So sepsis has a 38% mortality rate. The way we treat it is get early access to treatment, early access to antibiotics. So we want to monitor in real time and know what's happening. And so Epic, the EHR provider that provides the EHR here at DCSD Health, they offer a tool that can predict sepsis. Well, out of everybody who develops sepsis, it missed 2/3 of them.
Pretty good.
And then of people it provided a actionable response, it was only 6% of the time.
But there's plenty of examples where AI has helped also in terms
Where's
of
an
protection, right?
example? There's
Clearly, Dr. Joseph Menn, right? I'm sure you can hear.
Yeah.
Dr. Joseph Menn is one of the leading experts on heart health in the world, right? He started a company called Clearly, right?
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is, the reason most people die of heart attacks, right, isn't because the hard blockages that you see in the heart, right, the arteries, right? That's a calcified blockages, and that's what shows up in your contrast CT scans, right? And so you go in, you get a calcium score of 0, and you think you're healthy and you're fine, right? But it turns out what they've learned using AI is it's the soft blockages that the cardiac, the contrast CT scans cannot see, but the AI can see, right? Which is the actual killer. The vast majority of people who die from heart attacks, right, die what's called the widowmaker, right, which is the soft blockages. And it's basically, you were there at A360 when Dr. Mann presented, right? And so that's rolling out as a company. That's a real use of AI that's saving lives right now today, right?
I would push back and I would say those claims are claims research is marketing. Those aren't third-party research. AI is not put through the same regulatory standards as pharmaceutical agents. If you have an AI, you never have to test it. That's no joke. The FDA said in 2021, they said in 2021, the FDA said, listen, machine learning, we can't regulate it, right? Because here's what I know. I know Ozempic is semaglutide. And I know everybody who gets it gets the same thing over and over again. So they went, AI is different. The model's update. So what are we going to do? Nothing. So people are going to be able to monetize tools that come to market for it, and have no idea if it makes you better or worse. It's just research as marketing. Now, what are we going to do to fix this? It takes regulations to fix this. Maybe companies will evolve where they care about rigorous third-party evaluation. But until then, you're just a guinea pig to make $1.
That's a broad sweeping statement.
I have a tendency to always sit next to the television. This is good. So here's the way that I think we look at it is that there are some markets that will fund themselves, right? When you look at drug discovery, that there's a lot of money there. And so when you look at the $3, where would I invest? I'd invest in the areas that will have the biggest impact. And that isn't already going to be funded through, capitalism. And so that's kind of the way that I look at this situation. I agree, though. We need to get better at evaluating what's effective and what's not, because the marketing collateral is definitely out ahead of the effectiveness of a lot of these things. And I think we also need to, realize that we are AI as a topic it's not new. We've been talking about machine learning. We've been doing these things, protein folding and all of that. It's not new either. All of these things have been out for a long time. It's gotten more mainstream finally. And so we're all talking about it. My dad talks about ChatGPT and he can barely use his iPhone. And so, it's becoming more mainstream now. And now I think we're starting to get into a different conversation, which is how do we normalize this into our society? And so for that topic, I think I can say what we don't do is we don't use AI only for advertising purposes, right? Which is historically where most of the AI spend was going. And so as we get into areas of being more effective and more impactful, I think we have to look at, where are those areas that are going to be less invested in that would have the greatest amount of impact on society. But to answer that, I think we need a lot more testing.
If I can throw another example out, right? 2 weeks ago, FDA approved a device for dermatologists. That device is an AI-based device to detect skin cancer, right? And the accuracy of the detection apparently is higher than humans alone, right? So it was FDA approved.
That's sound. It's a different strategy that doesn't apply to the tools we talk about.
Well, I think you're making
the
a
problem
broad
with
statement.
no,
about
I'm making a
AI
broad
in
statement
general.
because I would say Sound is an entirely opt-in program. The FDA does not go police the marketplace. They don't go, John is making a tool to do dermatological predictions, so we need to test his tool. I have to come in and opt in. And so the number of people opted in that marketplace is tiny compared to the market. And from what, for example, dermatology has been one because it's slightly different. They're arguing it's making a clinical decision, not a recommendation. That's why they're doing SAM. That's what they would say. But a lot of this stuff hides behind clinical decision support. And so the AI is going through the doctor, so we don't need to evaluate it. Those tools, I'm not aware, there's no sepsis prediction tool that's ever been evaluated and put through SAM recommendation, period, end of story. I can't think of anything that we use in intensive care that's been through SAM at all.
Do you want to say more?
I think we clearly have a slight difference of opinion here.
It's not an opinion. It's a data-driven statement.
We just got to be careful.
I'm just feeling for both of you guys.
Yeah. I would say this. I would say, listen, I'm not trying to paint everybody as bad in this industry, and certainly not you. I have no idea, what the evaluation of your tool would achieve, and my hope is it would achieve positive benefits. But what I'm saying is in the 1890s, snake oil salesmen did not like the idea of the FDA, but now we take it as a regulatory standard, and we know that drugs are still lucrative. Plenty of my friends are rich because of drug making, right? But we know it gets to market because it works. And in AI right now, we don't want to take on that standard. The White House executive order on AI that comes into effect 2 months from now did not once mention patient outcomes, not once when we talked about HHS. We have to accept a firm consensus where science is going to drive AI, and that means evaluating if it works or not. It's just that simple, and it's not required, and it should be.
So I'm going to go back to the question of $3. So I would buy stamps. One letter would be to the NIH to say, here's an amazing opportunity. We need to really understand the potential for AI and be able to measure it. The second would go to the president and say, fix your statement to make sure that John's happy. And the third would be to my best friend, letting him know or her know that whether or not AI prospers, I care about them, I want to be with them. When they're in need, I'm going to care for them. Because in the end, it's caring for one other human being that makes life meaningful and brings peace and brings justice. So I know you've only got $3, but the alternative is go to Vegas and turn it into 30 million, and we're all better off.
So that's a theoretical $3.
I understand.
What we do, we have a question back there with the microphone, and we'll try to get to everybody. We have so many questions.
And I guess touching, sorry, is mic on?
Yeah, it is.
It is, just hold it close.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is better.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just touching on sort of the ideas of empathy and regulation that we got to. I sort of want to follow up on the structural issue of doctors being overworked in the toxic and really deeply unempathetic situation, right? But part of me is wrong, but isn't it traditionally the role of nurses, end of life care, therapists, frontline folks to care and patients? I think for me, I just want to ask a question. Aren't we running the risk on some level of replacing or subsuming or leaving aside these patient care techniques with a machine that might not be ready to deliver the same things, might not be ready to provide touch or inflection in voice or, sort of just that sense of soul that you have when you're with other people, right? I want to ask what kind of efforts are being taken to ensure that empathetic AI augments us rather than replacing us?
A really good question. John wants to answer that for you.
I'll let the guy that's going to go through SAM trials next year tell you about it.
Actually, let me start by saying that I'm going to challenge John right now to go back to those people who participated in his trial, to understand maybe the graders, and ask them, are you now willing to turn over some of your responsibility for showing empathy to AI? In other words, are you willing to outsource your empathy to AI? It is a real risk. It's an acknowledged risk. If AI is so good at writing these notes in response to email messages, maybe I can spend less time worrying about that and more or less outsource that to AI. That would, I know you're not for that. I can't imagine you're for
No,
that.
I'll tell you what I'm for.
You are for it.
I'll tell you what I'm for.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna let you do that. But I think that if we take away from physicians and healthcare providers their fundamental commitment to caring for and feeling with and really acknowledging the patient, then I think we compromise the quality of their care. So I don't want that to happen. And yes, I think it's a risk, John.
I'm very optimistic on the potential of AI to achieve great outcomes. I'm not optimistic that we have a system that would realize those outcomes by discriminating between what works and what doesn't work. That's what I clarify. And when I look at the device here at the Ria, I see great potential for it to impact patient outcomes potentially. I would clearly want that to impact patient outcomes. And I think we need to maximize it. And that's good for you.
We're definitely in alignment on that.
And it's not snake oil salesman versus not. I think everybody's in the industry to achieve a benefit. And achieving that benefit will also maximize profits, of course. We live in America, great place. But evaluation will help differentiate in a crowded marketplace between what works and what doesn't work when you may not be the best product available. And that's why evaluation becomes so important. Not just for entry to market, but overall. So like, would I turn these on? I would say, yeah, I would turn on messaging, but I would want to do so in the context of a randomized controlled trial. But we've already turned it on. And then I would want to do more than just say, this works or I'm fine. Yes, it can come to market. No, it can't come to market. I think we need to change the way we think about tools. So like, there's a lot that FDA can learn from like NHTSA, the National Highway for Traffic Safety Administration. Right? They decide based on procedures what car can come to the market. Right? If you don't have a seatbelt, you can't come to market. If you don't have an airbag, you can't come to market. But they don't adjudicate that with a test. They spend their testing doing what? Crash tests that estimate the probability of serious injury, and then they translate that into a 4-star safety rating for the consumer. And so for purchasers, like a CMO at a healthcare center, or for patients who these products will be used on, or payers, like the insurers, how are they going to know what is the 4-star, humanoid robot in the marketplace? And if he's going to create that 4-star product, how's he going to know he has a 4-star product unless everyone's forced to go through the same system, the same form of evaluation? That's something we don't do in healthcare at all now, but we could potentially do when it comes to AI.
Kind of going back to the question that you just asked, I'm just here for fun, but I work directly with patients at the trauma PCH at my hospital. I can say right now, California has some of the best standards for healthcare. For patient care, Insurance Memorial is one of the highest rated for patient care and patient being taken care of. And I can say right now that patients already aren't getting any of it anymore. It's not happening. It looks like as much as we tried, the systems are not supporting us. The training is all there, but we have so many patients, the nurses are overloaded, the NAs are overloaded, everybody's overloaded. As much as we care about our patients, if we were to offer the highest standard of patient care to every single one of them, we would all quit within 7 months. It would just not be possible. So you kind of shut that down when you have to get the job done, because it's more important that they survive than that their feelings weren't hurt or they felt like you were there. So, from personal experience, I'm very much looking forward to AI to support the drudge work so that people can specialize in what we're good at, which is empathy. That's what humans are supposed to be good at, so why not support everything else that is just mind-blowingly terrible to deal with so that we can focus on providing that to people. And that's kind of my personal take on what I'm excited for with AI.
Who wants to tackle the comment on this?
It sounds like we all agree with that, don't we? We all agree.
I think that's exactly right. In our business, we always say something which is we believe humanoids will uplift humanity. Right? There are a lot of problems in the world that we just don't have enough people to solve at this moment in time, right? And how you use the technology, any technology, right? It's ultimately up to us. but every piece of technology that's coming through our world, whether it's computers, phones, the powered buildings Stacy talked about, right, made life a little bit easier, right? I think that humanoids will too, whether it's going to be either on the empathy side or whether it's actually doing physical tasks. We believe that there'll be all variants in the future, right? Just like when you look out on the street, there's not one car for everybody. There's all kinds of cars, right? So we see it.
Next.
Hi, my name is Suzette. I'm the Executive Assistant to the Director of Financial Aid here at BCSD. And I think an overarching kind of comment that I've been hearing quite a bit is about integration and how we can do that in the healthcare system. And kind of piggybacking off of what my friend in the purple just said about can we implement a system for AI to take over the drug work. In 2019, the Royal College of Physicians found that 25% of nurses' daily work is focused on things like administrative tasks, sending information to pharmacy, writing those messages that we talked about. And part of what we tried to mitigate that was implementing NLP-based applications, but the difficulty there is with integrating and legacy systems. So my question is, to what extent would a humanoid like Ria be able to do something like that, and is it practical in that space?
Well, I think in a humanoid like Ria, we have to talk about where is an application that's for AI, and where's an application where you need an actual physical robot, right? Ria is multimodal, right? And so what that means is she has the capability to take in a perception of her environment through her visual array system, right? And so if you ask me, is Ria appropriate to deploy in an administrative task which doesn't require that, then I'd say no, you probably don't want hardware in a place where you could actually deploy software, which is less expensive and not going to break down or anything else, right? But we want to deploy Ria in a place where those multimodal capabilities and the hardware really makes a difference, a material difference, right? And so I suspect the challenge that you're setting out here is one for AI for sure, but maybe not a robot.
Hi, I'm Cyril. I do deep learning research on theoretical foundations of AI at the Sanford Data Science Institute. And I think it's interesting, computer science has historically been a very insular field. Computer science has been very skeptical of how sort of technologies birthed from the field are used outside. Even, back here in the 80s, Jeffrey Hinton, who's a Turing Award winner, actually made back propagation here around the heart. So UCSC is a very rich history of this. I wanted to ask you, from sort of your diverse perspectives, how do you differentiate, uses of AI that are just like trendy or maybe like fads versus things that actually have real value, and how do you sort of judge that long term? Good question.
She's the buyer, so she'll tell you.
Well, I'll just tell you, it's still a problem. I mean, I work for a company that has a lot of engineers, and when engineers get bored, they go make up problems to solve. And it's problems that's interesting to them most of the time, or that feel hard to them, and so that's kind of what they lean into. But we have to have programs in place to mitigate that. And we have to focus people on what's the impact that you're driving. And that's where I think stuff like buildings like this, centers like this are helping that conversation, because you need to teach people how to be entrepreneurs and how to look at the problem that matters versus can I solve the problem. And I think a lot of times, we see a lot of engineers, especially in the deep learning space, that's let me go solve a problem that's fun and cool, but it may not be impactful. And so that's where I think we need more learning and more education on how to be more discerning on where we spend our time. But then again, look, if an engineer is passionate about solving a problem that's just for entertainment purposes, there's still a space for that. All for it, but we should just be honest about it.
Hi, my name is Michael Chaffetz. I'm the founder of Compose AI, and I think there are some really interesting points about empathetic AI and the values around that. And I would just kind of paint my picture in that a few small points that I think are necessary for the question. So one is around the fMRI example. I would say,
yes, you could look at a form of intelligence and model, whether it's capturing or quote in resonance, but I think ultimately modeling or being able to predict action or behavior. And this is kind of the issue with the fascinating vulnerable AI, is that the nature of AI is very different than human intelligence, and that you can imagine almost like a gain of function kind of test where you have an empathetic AI, and then you just simply downloaded that into another system, and then you have that system do the opposite. And that's so then I think you can think of dangers that can come with predicting accurately human emotion and behavior, those sociopathic AIs, that even if you were to create a vulnerable AI, that there's certain dynamics problems. So one I would argue is that we are economically incentivized to create empathetic AI, and that there's a genie out of the bottle issue, which is that there's a global ecosystem that can take that technology and slightly evolve it to gain function that is highly risky to humans on many different levels. So my question is to the panel, what level of risk do you think that AI that understands people deeply, let's say empathetic AI, but tweaked, presents to society? And if you accept that this is related to a systemic dynamic that we are headed towards, what interventions do you think that we can perform, perhaps anybody in this audience, in order to prevent those from occurring when there is no global control over the creation of AI currently?
I really like the ideas, and I think that I would argue that we need a team of people who understand AI deeply and who are motivated to create within it this possibility of real empathy. I mean, I think bringing together people who really care about it and who could really imagine modifying it in a way that allows it to pro-socially support human beings, really in approximating emotional empathy. I think doing that together would be wonderful. Now, there will always be risks, and I guess we'll learn about those risks as we make progress down this pathway, but we haven't gone there yet, and I would argue that there's very little risk in beginning the journey with eyes wide open about how that could turn out to be a very positive thing, or would really need controls, would really need education, so that, for example, a vulnerable AI would never recommend to a human anything that would make them more vulnerable, because it would be against the principles of the robot, if you will. But I agree with you. New territory, haven't been there before. Those of us in the Institute would love to be part of a process that led to that engagement with people that we don't normally interact with. And I think the possibilities are really wonderful, but yes, there's going to always be the risk that we forgot about something, we didn't cover something, and somebody will suffer as a result of that. So thanks for the question. I want that dialogue to prosper.
Okay, so I think that, terrible humans will use AI in terrible ways.
Yeah.
Right, and so, and we have to, and we see that in social media play out. I'm not saying that the people who coded those were all terrible humans, but, there are ways that, if you're gonna monetize behavior, there's always going to be risk to that. And so it's something as a society we have to look at. And I don't think that there's an answer for that. When we get into the predicting people and what they're going to do, I bet you most of us in this room don't feel totally confident in our own ability to predict human behavior, especially if you have a spouse or you're in a relationship. None of us can totally predict the behavior that's going to happen with the people that we're closest to even. So I don't know that, I'm not convinced that AI is going to be much better than us, personally. what AI is going to be good at is reflecting back to the person what they want to hear. And I think that's the stuff that we saw that's happened in social media. And so, I think what we have to do is we have to start training people and teaching people to get more diverse opinions and to spread out kind of how they consume information, so it's not always single source. But that's I think that's a society problem. I don't think that's a tech problem.
Can I just add to that? I think it's a brilliant question, and I can tell you why we started down the path of building a robot like this, right? We, in our company, I stole something from Jeff Bezos. I always say this: we are missionaries, not mercenaries. We start with the mission first, right? What is it that we really passionately believe in? And then we see as engineers, how can we sort of address this, if you will? And in the case of the humanoid, the robot, why did we start down this path? Because ultimately, we felt like loneliness was a real problem, a growing problem in the world. And sadly, we just are unable to form enough human-to-human connections to solve that problem on our own. And so we started down a path of trying to create robots that could be companions for lonely people. Particularly, if you look at the studies in the U.S., okay, loneliness is shaving 8 years off the life of our senior citizens, right? And that's a real problem. So yeah, I completely agree. There might be some unintended consequences as we go down this path, and we're learning together, how do you create a companion robot or an empathetic companion robot or AI, right? But the other side is still happening right now, which is that people are lonely, right? And we can't form enough human-to-human connections. So maybe we can create a tool that will help even partially address the loneliness. Brilliant. We have a question.
So I'm Joe Sago. I'm a first-year data science undergraduate student, and I'm an international student. So definitely, I really was interested in the fact that you want to explore more into the culture of a place so that the AI can respond better. And at first, I was going to immediately ask, how are you going to track the culture down? Are you going to do it through language or something? But also, as the conversation progressed, I remembered that during the lockdown, this was mainly highlighted. A lot of times, the culture of a place itself can be against the use of AI or be against the use of medicine in general. We're going to be we have our own remedies. We don't need chemically manufactured medicine. So in those cases, would it be better if the AI responds to them by their own culture, suggesting home remedies, or would it be better to push chemically manufactured medicines? How are you going to exactly progress in that? Because you did mention that at a point AI could help everyone, but a lot of times with technology, the problem isn't the technology itself; it's about the beliefs of the people. So.
That's a good question.
I would like to think that there would be a process involved. The learning would happen. The AI would be able to teach in a culturally relevant, sensitive way. That whereas there are local remedies that have been used for centuries, thousands of years, and whereas AI respects the idea that people have derived benefit from that, there are additional ways to think about that problem and how it might be treated. So a gentle, thoughtful, caring interaction suggesting that, yes, there is cultural value to what's going on now, and yet there's additional new information that is interpretable, understandable, even in that culture, that might actually be provided an even more powerful way of dealing with the problem, which is some disorder, some pain, some issue that's considered a medical issue.
So seeing kind of a gradual shift from the culture.
Yeah, I'm thinking that you begin where the patient is, you acknowledge and validate their feelings, you recognize the cultural knowledge that they have by nature of living in that culture, and you in no way reject that, but you suggest to them, you motivate them to think, to learn a little bit more about these alternatives, still culturally appropriate alternatives to what is available in that culture in terms of new medicine. You make the case that in different cultures, this medicine had a very powerful positive effect, and they should be aware of that, and they may wish to learn more about that. And if they do, you're there. You, the AI agent, are there to help educate them further.
I had a question for you. I'm one of those people that if I'm on the phone and the person I'm speaking to, not AI, the person I'm speaking to is like showing empathy, you get annoyed, you're wasting time. So I actually request that they stop using that language and just get to the point. So when I write an email, I use AI a lot to help me sound more human and empathetic and all of that. And something I wondered about that is that empathy and compassion are things that you kind of have to practice. It's a habitual type of thing. And when you write these emails or interact with people, you mentioned you could say something terse and AI could kind of fix that and filter it for you. And I wonder if you get in a habit of that kind of all the time, like I have recently, if you may actually lose your capacity for empathy and compassion over time because you don't use it. You're just kind of saying whatever in a terse way, and then letting AI filter it and send that. And, that looks good. That's like something a human would say. So I kind of wonder, with AI and humans kind of, you mentioned that maybe it's not AI or a human, maybe it's AI with, with a human. Is the best combination in terms of messaging patients and things like that. But I wonder at the same time if you kind of build that habit and you stop practicing empathy and compassion actively, if maybe we're teaching people that they don't actually need to know the skills anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and let me make the case that you have to make. I think you'll get this very readily, that when you're feeling with somebody and they're feeling miserable, you're feeling miserable. Emotional empathy is aversive. At some level, it hurts. At some level, it hurts. And if it hurts, naturally, we try to avoid it. A skillful empathy that you can learn allows you to be there just for long enough to sample it emotionally and then move to a cognitive empathy, which is not aversive, which empowers you to understand what the other person is feeling. Yes, if you're not skillful in your empathy, you'll avoid it because it hurts. Not always a great feeling. And in that case, of course you'll choose AI. And if you choose AI, of course, ultimately, you'll have less experience feeling with the other. So I think the solution can't be to outsource your empathy. It can't say, I have no obligation to show empathy. It has to be that I can employ empathy in a skillful way and let AI do what it really does well, which is maybe it modifies my answer, maybe it modifies my response to that person. I can use it, but not to the extent that it absolves me of feeling with the other.
I love that. We're getting to the top of the hour for what we're doing. I wanted to thank everyone here for kind of sticking with us, but also being a part of the conversation. As we said, we don't like to do these as lectures where we get up and just want to show you how smart we are. We want to listen to kind of how you're digesting a lot of this information in the world, for you to learn a little bit about how different people are approaching it, but more importantly, to hear from you, your concerns, your questions, your hopes, and some of your aspirations for this. And so let this be the beginning of a conversation as we go forward rather than the end of it. Please join me in thanking all of my panelists tonight. To say a few closing remarks, we're fortunate to have our Vice Chancellor for Research, Corey Piguesa, here, and she was making a comment.
Thank you. I want to thank Greg for bringing together these really, really energizing discussions, our panel, all of their expertise and their empathy, and all of you for coming. So tonight, it just so happened that we are having a showcase of all that we do in the design and innovation building for the Chancellor, the Executive Vice Chancellor, the Director of Advancement, the Director of Student Services. So we have most of the senior leadership here seeing what happens, because as we are moving as a university into a new strategic planning period,
we want innovation to be a foundation of everything we do for student success, for our partnerships, for research, for the impact that we have in the world. And one of the things I love about innovation is that we can't be successful as a university unto itself. We need it to be a partnership with the community, with business leaders. So this kind of event where we have conversations that we bring in our students, our staff, our faculty, our community members, our business leaders, to bring in perspectives from so many different ways is how we will really help our university know what problems to solve and to solve them in the right way in partnership. So thank you for being here, and please say hi to some of the leaders as you're leaving.
Perfect opportunity, so thank you. And remember, up here, if you want to know more about the Innovation Happening at UCSD, here's the link. Go to it. Have a good night, and talk to you soon.
Oh, what, you want an express? I'm just better than